I think this is probably the video that I thought about the most before making the video, probably prepped the most, not because I was nervous to make it. I love talking. I don't ever have a problem with making videos, but probably because I've never really given this topic much thought before. And in the most humble, non-controversial way possible, given the nature of this channel and in an attempt to not misrepresent myself as someone who's always deeply cared about cultural issues or has been fighting social justice on the front lines, this video in no way is going to be covering social justice issues, cultural identity issues, me being sad as a Korean American in this country. These are more interesting thoughts I've had of being Korean American for the past 15, 16 years, being Korean for the past 23 years, something a bit more lighthearted, if that's possible, talking about identity. I may cover the heavier topics in another video, but I just don't think it's right for me to suddenly come out and say, these are the issues surrounding our communities and me being who I am, when I really haven't done any activism beforehand. And for me to suddenly act like someone that's been doing that, that would really give off the impression that I'm doing it for the views, and it would undermine those that have actually been fighting those efforts and doing things behind the scenes instead of in front of a camera that's about to be uploaded for thousands to see. It is quite an exciting time to be Korean. 2020, for sure, was a very exciting time to be Korean. South Korea was all over the news as the model for the perfect coronavirus approach. I'm not sure if that's still the case. There's been a bit of up and down. But anyways, no press is bad press, so they were in the news. As far as mainstream media is concerned, we had the best year ever in terms of cultural media-related entertainment. We had BTS, we had Blackpink, we had Bong Joon-ho, and we had Brian. We had all these supporting this Korean wave, everyone thinking Korea is this hip country that's very good at media and the arts and music, which is all true, and bringing in billions of dollars into the country, which are all very great things. But as much as I like to spend this time talking about my big crush on Jennie from Blackpink, my focus today is going to be about Korean Americans feeling like they're at crossroads of two cultures. And I think this is probably not unique to Korean Americans, probably a shared experience by all immigrant Americans, all Americans that haven't been here for generations, and perhaps even Americans that have gone abroad, stay there for a long time, come back to America. I actually think this is a worldwide problem. Now that we're constantly talking about race, constantly talking about identity, people are very hyper aware of what identity is, which is a great thing, but it's really hard to think about these things because, one, many of these things are new. Being Korean American isn't a century, millennium old concept. Number two, I think people have trouble understanding that they could wear multiple hats. I don't think people like the idea that they could be one kind of identity in one environment and a second kind of identity in a second environment. As a almost second generation Korean American, I came here when I was 5 or 6. I'm sure many of you that have immigrated during a similar time period in your life can attest to the fact that you never really feel like you're 100% this way, but not 100% that way either. And I think a lot of this comes down to parenting. In no way to undermine people's experiences with their families. I'm sure there are bad families as just as there are good ones, but I'm really thankful for my family, and I tend to be kind of against this idea of parents should have done a better job when they had their kids immigrate with them and parent them better. I think immigrant parents are under a lot of pressure. They don't know what's going on. It's a lot harder for a 30, 40-year-old to adjust to a completely new country after being in one country for so long and being responsible to take care of their children and try their best to adjust them in addition to themselves and give them a new life. No one moves to a new country for poops and giggles. They're looking at it for another opportunity, perhaps, and most likely a better opportunity for the kids. The issue is that Korean parents bring their kids from Korea, bring them here, and there's an American culture surrounding them. At home, they have to be practicing the Korean culture they brought from Korea because that's what they're used to, that's how they've been raised, and that's all they know. When the kid steps out of the house and they go into the American culture, they're faced with American culture, but they're conditioned in Korean culture, so that starts butting heads. They see their friends sometimes calling their parents by their first name, which in their communities, it's fine, but in our communities, that would just be unheard of. And you might never hear from that kid again. Just kidding. I'm not gonna go through all the cliche stereotypes of being Korean or being Asian American, but essentially, you're constantly fed Korean culture at home. You're going out and meeting American culture. And I think subconsciously, the kid gets a little confused and they start comparing their home culture to the outside culture. And I'm sure if you're a Korean American or if you have Korean American kids, you've heard the phrase, blank's mom lets me do this. Why don't you let me do this? Is this because you're Korean? Why are you so Korean? Why are you so Asian? And a lot of conflict starts happening inside the home. Frankly, I don't have a resolution for this. I just think it's an inevitable issue. The identity of Korea has been around for thousands of years. The American identity, whether it derived from European roots or the hodgepodge of the cultures that we have, has been around for hundreds of years. Of course, someone that is used to being Korean, raising someone to be kind of Korean in an American setting is bound to have some level of conflict. I think this starts getting even more interesting and even more confusing as the Korean American kid starts growing up. Realistically, if you're Korean American, then I don't even think this is a stereotype, probably statistically true, you're probably concentrated in a set number of areas within the United States. This is no one's fault either. People like to move to comfortable places where they have the resources to get them started. People have similar backgrounds that they can relate to. You can't just go to the middle of nowhere and hope for the best. If you're trying to be successful but also somewhat comfortable, you want to be around those that have had similar footings. So most Korean Americans, if you ask them, are probably in Southern California in a region like Fullerton, Buena Park, Garden Grove, Irvine, or you're probably somewhere in New Jersey near the Fort Lee area, in Chicago near Naperville. I probably named a handful of places, and if you're a Korean American watching this, it's very likely that you live in one of these places. And that's not a stereotype, and that's not a bad thing. These are just places that Korean Americans have always been in, and therefore people move to because of jobs, because of people they already know, because of investments along with people they already know, and for the overall quality of education, quality of life. But going to these places is kind of a dual-edged sword. The whole point of immigration is to go into that country, take the opportunities available in that country, and run with it. I'm also a big proponent that in order to truly adjust to a country's culture and do well, by definition, you have to somewhat assimilate. It's important to keep your roots and of course not lose your identity, but to beat the system, to be part of the system, you have to somewhat obey the system. But if you're in one of these areas like Southern California or New Jersey, you're going to be surrounded by Koreans and Korean Americans. More likely than not, they share similar experiences from you. You have family connections to them. They look like you. They're bilingual / speaking Korean like you. So it's a lot easier to befriend them, bring them over. Their parents know your parents. You go to church with them, most likely. So a lot of your experience is not with the Americans that have been here for generations and generations, the Americans that you would envision as you watch Disney Channel and think about what being American is. But you live alongside Korean Americans and Koreans who are in the same boat as you, and you foster a culture of your own. But you kind of continue to do Korean activities with Korean people, speaking Korean, watching Korean things. And instead of becoming American, you become Korean American. Those are all fine things. I just think it brings an interesting experience where you continue to have the Koreanness kind of linger around, but you're not fully Korean. You're faced with an American society, but because you're surrounded by Korean Americans, you never fully assimilate into the American culture. If you had a camera following your life or documenting your life, you could probably notice that you probably act a little different when you're home versus when you're near Korean American friends, when you're near Koreans, when you're near non-Korean Americans in America. Your voice might change, the way that you behave might change, the topics you talk about changes, your language changes, your entire demeanor might change. Scientifically, Korean is a higher decibel language than English. When I speak Korean, my voice goes up. And this chaos is just fueled by the fact that you are someone that came from Korea or are born to Korean American parents, and you're a single drop, and you live amongst this bubble, which is the Korean family that you live amongst. And the Korean family has been in Korea for years and years and years, and that's what they're used to. So that's how they're raising you. They might try their best to adjust to American principles and give you American values, but at the end of it, they still have a Korean base. As you go out, you're amongst other Korean American kids that have had similar experiences, so you now join a bigger bubble. They might be even more assimilated than the Korean parents that you have. There's things that you learn from them about what it means to be American, but you're still bumping off on each other about Korean American experiences, being Korean American. And then you go out into the world and you have multiple layers around you of being Korean, being Korean American. And as you interact with those that you might perceive as more American than you, it's hard to pierce through the multiple layers of education and cultural identities that you've immersed into yourself and become like one of them. But here's the kicker that I want to talk about. I said this in the beginning of the video, but two things. One, being Korean American is a relatively new thing to be. Number two, people don't like the fact that they can be multiple things. It hurts their brain to think about that they're one thing in one situation and a second thing in another situation. But I think this is largely because it's encapsulated in this idea of a cultural identity. Let's take culture and identity out and think about this in a very practical standpoint. Everyone wears multiple hats all the time. The voice, the mannerisms, the actions that you perform / behave in front of your parents is 1000% different from the identity that you assume in front of your bestest friends or your girlfriend, or even on YouTube. The persona that you take on social media is 100% not the same persona that you take on in front of your parents. Same with being Korean American. The very word has a hyphen in the middle of it, and it combines two things, juxtaposes the idea of being Korean, the idea of being American. And now you've created this new identity within yourself of being Korean American. Even more so, there is no one definition of being Korean American, just as there's no one definition of being American. Of course, I can only speak about my experiences. I am a Korean American by definition, but more importantly, I am Brian Jun. The experiences that accumulated to become who I am is not shared by any other person in this 8 billion people Earth. Korean American is something that encapsulates me, and I can express myself as a Korean American. But before I'm Korean American, I am Brian Jun, and the experiences I've had under the umbrella of being Korean American is sharply different from the experiences that Jay Park has had as a person that has had experiences as a Korean American. And that is all okay because this is new, and we have to get over the hurdle that it's okay to be multiple things in multiple situations. If anything, and I know perhaps I'm being overly optimistic here, but I almost think it's like a superhero. It's another tool under our belt. We have the ability to be in multiple environments and become somewhat different people in those environments. But that's not being fake. You're not changing yourself to be someone you're not. You're not lying to yourself about who you are. You are becoming the part of you that you're supposed to be in that scenario. And as you grow up and as you become more American or more Korean American, whatever that means to you, your actions in those scenarios might change. But that doesn't mean you're being fake or not real with these people. That is just who you are and what you're becoming in those scenarios. If one day as you're driving, instead of listening to Blackpink, you want to listen to Taylor Swift, that is just the person that you are at that moment. Not that I would ever choose Taylor Swift over Blackpink, ever, period. And in no way to make a problem out of nothing. If this has never been a struggle for you, great. But I think I've heard a lot of people say, I feel confused, I feel like I'm in this middle point where I'm not this 100%, I'm not that 100%. I think the easiest analogy here is you are you 100%. Not in a corny way, but the very fact that if you are a certain way around Koreans and if you're a certain way around Americans, that is who you are. And I think that's a very cool thing to be. It could be confusing at times, and you could ask yourself, who am I really if I wear all these multiple hats? But I really think it's an ability that not everyone has. And like I said in the beginning of the video, to make things even better, being Korean American is super cool. I usually don't promote myself other than my Clubhouse addiction recently, but I actually started a second channel. I'm gonna link it below. It's a Korean speaking channel. This largely came out of the realization that I think my Korean is diminishing. Being my arrogant self, I used to think that my Korean was quite good and I was perfectly bilingual, but recently, through Clubhouse, by speaking to Koreans and being around Korean people even more, by being back in Southern California, I've realized my limitations of being Korean, and I think having this channel will allow me to practice Korean more. So if you are someone that understands Korean, or if you're interested in seeing me butcher Korean over and over and over again, or if you're interested in me speaking in a slightly higher tone, check out the link below. But as always, thanks for watching, and see you guys in the next video. And I'm going to do a Korean let's go. Gotcha!